Hogan's Heroes ran for 6 seasons on CBS, daring to make a Nazi prison camp funny. A few of the actors playing those goofy German officers had actually fled the real Third Reich. Here's what happened to the cast of Motovision's most unlikely comedy. Colonel Hogan was the face of Stalag 13 for 6 long seasons. Charming, untouchable, always 3 steps ahead. Bob Crane was 37 when it all started. Already a top-rated Los Angeles radio DJ who had interviewed Marilyn Monroe, this role made him a household name. But what followed ended his story in a way nobody saw coming. His personal life was quietly fallen behind the scene. He left his wife of 20 years and Tertian for his co-star Secret Valdez, who played Klink's Citri Haldis. They married on the show's soundstage in 1970 and had a son named Scott, but by 1978, they separated. Behind his wholesome TV image, Crane had developed a dark, severe sexual addiction, recording his private encounters on early video gear, details that only went public after he died. On June 29, 1978, he was found beaten to death in his Scottsdale apartment, his career reduced to dinner theater after the show ended. The murder remains officially unsolved. His friend John Carpenter was acquitted at trial in 1994. Even in 20's Crimecasts still debate the case, but no other arrests were made. The actor playing his on-screen nemesis took a different path in almost every possible way. Klemperer had just one strict condition before agreeing to play Colonel Klink on the show. He would only take the job if Klink was written as a complete fool. If the show ever gave Nazis a weed walk. For a Jewish refugee who fled Germany in 1933 and fought in the United States, the Nazis, this was not just a creative choice, it was a deeply moral one. He was 45 when the pilot filmed. As the son of legendary conductor Otto Klemperer, the classically trained musician played Klink's terrible vine solos with absolute, practiced incompetence. That contrast between the character's awful playing and Klemperer's actual genius was one of the cost-saving sights. Years before Hogan's Heroes, he had actually played a very different kind of German, portraying a chilling judge in Judgment at Nuremberg opposite Spencer Tracy, making his pivot to comedy even more incredible. 4 marriages later, his final union to actress Kim Hamilton lasted until his death. He won back-to-back Emmy Awards for the role in 1968 and 69, later returning to orchestras as a narrator. He passed away on December 6, 2000, at age 80. The man who shared the screen with him had a tragic backstory that made Klink's failures look like a different class of dark comedy. John Banner's most famous line on the show was, "I know nothing," delivered with a big shrug and a mouth full of stolen food. It became a legendary TV catchphrase. But what Banner actually carried with him every single day was the knowledge that his family had murdered in concentration camps. As the family's sole survivor, he was acting in Switzerland when Hitler took over Austria. He was 55 when the series started. His famous bulk, jumping from 180 pounds to 280, he lovingly blamed on if Christine's cooking. They married in 1965, staying together until he died, before the war. He was actually Yelashing romantic lead, European theater, shocking fans who only knew him as bumbling Schultz. Just like Klemperer, Banner was a Jewish refugee who loved mocking his oppressors. He famously asked, "Who complains his bezblanas Jews?" The comedy was real, but so was the trauma. He died of a hemorrhage in Vienna on his 63rd birthday, January 28, 1973. Then there was the RAF corporal who spent years picking his pockets. Richard Dawson played Newkirk, the smooth-talking con man who could pick locks and crack open safes with ease. By 1976, that exact same charm landed him one of the biggest hosting gigs on national television. As the original host of Family Feud, Dawson became a household name across America, famously kissing every female contestant. Audiences in the 1970s loved it, though his own daughter told him it made her uncomfortable. He was 32 when the series launched, already divorced from British star Diana Dors. That marriage produced 2 sons, Yamar and Gary, before ending in 1966. Offset, things have but incredibly tense. Dawson believed he should be the star and didn't hide his resentment. Writers eventually kept them apart on set as the tension grew. His next marriage surprised everyone. In 1991, he married Gretchen Johnson, a woman he first met when she was a confirmé further. They did Shannon. Dawson died on June 2, 2012 at 79, and Family Feud remains a massive global franchise, always honoring him as the original. The French actor who cooked while Newkirk picked locks had a history that made Stalag 13 personal. Robert Clary was only 17 when they deported him to Buchenwald. By the time he walked onto the set of Hogan's Heroes as Corporal Lou, he was 39. The death camp number tattooed on his skin was hidden under long sleeve. He was the sole survivor of his parents and 10 siblings. Everyone else was murdered. On screen, he used gourmet food to bribe Schultz and his tiny frame to his tiny shipping crates. He always wore long sleeves. Asked how he could play comedy in a simulated camp, he was plump. Stalag 13 was just a prisoner camp. The difference to him was absolute. Before the war, he sang professionally in France. He married Natalie Canner, daughter of Eddie K. 2 years, until she passed in 1997. His later years went to Holocaust education, ensuring the history was never lost. He was 96 when he passed in November 2022. The very last surviving member of the original cast. The actor who spent 6 seasons operating the secret radio under Stalag 13's floorboards took a completely different path afterward. Ivan Dixon brought Sergeant Kinch to life on the show for 5 seasons. He was the radio operator, codebreaker, and Hogan's second-in-command underground, but by his own is under-rused. By 1970, he realized his character was just there to push Hogan's plots instead of getting his own, so he refused to sign on for the final season. The producers quickly swapped Kinch for a new face, never offering a single explanation on screen. Dixon stepped behind the camera, directing hundreds of episodes for hit shows like The Waltons, The A-Team, and Magdalene. In 1973, he directed The Spook Who Sat by the Door, a heavy political film from theaters, but now hailed as a classic. He also worked as a stunt double for Sidney Poitier in The Defiant Ones. He was 34 when Hogan's Heroes started. Dixon was a dedicated civil rights activist, serving as president of Negro Actors for Action. He married Burley Ray in 1954. They stayed together 54 years, until March 16, 2008, at 76. The crew's young American bomb expert ended up at Stalag 13 almost by accident. What he did his life with them, something nobody saw coming. Sergeant Carter, that innocent kid who was a total genius with dynamite, but somehow completely clueless about everything, was never meant to be a series regular. Larry Havas was only hired for a single pilot episode, but the producers saw his jittery, nervous energy on screen. They loved him and put him in the permanent cast instead. It was a lucky twist of casting that defined the show. Havas was only 29 when filming. He was already a jazz singer with a 1959 album on Capitol Records. Through the ensuing, he wore the Israel wedding ring daily, hiding it under black gloves or skin-colored tape instead of playing a 1940s bachelor wit. He married Ann Ross in 1955, staying together for 40 years until her passing in 1995. After producing various game shows during the 1980s, he walked away from Hollywood and tied to Teaks Theater. Full-time at Texas State University. He kept the job until dying of cancer in September 2003. Meanwhile, the Russian spy who made life so chaotic for the team had a wildly different career path. Maria hit Hogan's Heroes like a total force of nature. Played by Nita Talbot, the gorgeous Russian spy would suddenly appear in Klink's office without warning. Completely untrustworthy, yet impossible to ignore. Talbot played the part with over-the-top drama, arguing that making Maria too theatrical to be a spy was the perfect comedic choice. Born in 1930, she was a fixture of Golden Age TV throughout the 1950s, guest starring on Perry Mason and The Twilight Zone and The Untouchables, eventually scoring an Emmy nomination for Hogan's Heroes in 1960. Her Warner Brothers contract in the late 1940s listed her as Mitzi Talbot before she wed Dr. Mida. She married actor Don Huron in 1954, which lasted barely a year, then married Tonadius the 6170, having a daughter named Nicole. Following a voiceover run in the 1990s, his voicing Anastasia Hardy in the Spider-Man cartoon. She retired from acting 1997, 95 and 2026. One of the last surviving members of the original cast, living quietly in California, General Burkhalter had lived a very different life before ever setting foot in Klink's office. When Lai sent to Clary to play him in 1965, he was 57 years old, a decorated United States Army veteran who had once been arrested by the Retro Gestapo. After escaping to France in 1938, he fled to America and spent the war he had fled serving as a master sergeant in the U.S. Army Air Forces. Both of his parents were murdered at the Lenin concentration camp. Like Klemperer and Banner, he got something very personal out of playing a greedy, incompetent Nazi general for millions of viewers. Burkhalter cared nothing for ideology, only efficiency, spending most of his screen time threatening to send Klink to the Russian front. Before the war, he had been a Shakespearean actor and director in Europe, sharing a screen with Marilyn Monroe and 3 in 1961. He spoke 5 languages. Annelies Wippermann married him in 1956, staying by his side until his death. In his 90s, he returned to Vienna to direct classical theater in the city that had once city. He died on June 2005 at 97. A public square in Vienna still carries his name. The original blonde secretary, who stood in Klink's outer office, had arrived at Stalag 13 by a route far more dramatic than anyone ever knew. The woman who played Helga in season 1 of Hogan's Heroes had already lived through more history than any Stradkonkover Kuni Tame. Cynthia Lynn was born Zinta Valdezimilis in Riga, Latvia, and she and her mother fled the Soviet occupation during World War II, surviving Allied bombings before arriving in the United States. She was 28 when the cameras first started rolling at Stalag 13. Helga was Klink's sympathetic blonde secretary, happy to let Hogan steal glances at classified doll coffee for Rian Island stockings. Malin played her with a warmth that made the character useful to both sides of the wire, but after one season, she was abruptly written out and replaced by Secret Valdez. The backstage reasons behind this were never fully made public. She met Marlon Brando on the set of Bedtime Story back in 1964, and their long, turbulent relationship produced a daughter named Lisa, whom Lynn later confirmed to Memmer. Escape to Freedom was actually Brando's biological child. After small roles in Mission Impossible, she walked away from Hollywood to become a legal secretary and then a school teacher. She died on March 10, 2014, at 76, from multiple organ failure. The Gestapo officer who terrified Klink more than any prisoner ever did had a very different kind of intensity off-screen. Now, who is this guy? Major Hochstetter's shrieking entrance into Klink's office was legendary. Eyes wide, jaw set, convinced every week that something was deeply wrong at Stalag 13. It was one of Hogan's Heroes' recurring pleasures. Howard Kane made the Gestapo officer dangerous, rather than merely foolish. Playing him as a parodied frantic energy felt like real menace. He was 41 when he joined the cast in 1967, a Tennessee-born American Jewish Navy veteran who had actually fought against the very regime his character represented. Before the show, he starred on Broadway in Inherit the Wind and played a key role in Judgment at Nuremberg, bringing a serious dramatic career straight into Hogan's Heroes. He became a constant face on 1970s and 1980s television, appearing Golden Mouths and Knight Rider. Away from the cameras, though, he was a master of 32 accents, an award-winning banjo player who competed regularly at bluegrass festivals. Married twice, his second wife Valerie Kane stayed with him until the end. They had 2 sons. On May 14, 1993, he died suddenly of a massive heart attack at 67. The bumbling British officer who kept stumbling into Hogan's perfectly organized plans had turned into tree art form. Bernard Fox appeared in 2 completely unrelated Titanic films, 39 years apart, as a look on Ned to Remember in 1958, and Colonel Archibald Gracie in James Cameron's Titanic in 1997. Between those bookends, he played Colonel Kittenden in Hogan's Heroes, Dr. Bombay in Bewitched, and voiced animated mice for Disney. Born in Wales in 1927, he served in the Royal Navy during World War II, and spent a classic Brassic interest with total authority. Kittenden was the protocol-obsessed RF colonel whose blundering escape schemes constantly threw into an entire operation. Fox loved that the character had zero awareness of his own incompetence, arguing it was exactly what would every teen scene work. He married Jacqueline Fox in 1961, and they stayed together for 55 years until he passed away. They had 2 daughters, Amanda and Valerie. He also voiced the Chairman Mouse in The Rescuers, and The Rescuers Down Under for Disney. It was a detail that always surprised fans who only knew his stiff military roles. He died of heart failure December 10, 2016, at 89. Annie, the man who stepped into Kinch's shoes for the final season, carried a very different story team. Kenneth Washington joined Hogan's Heroes in its final season as Sergeant Baker, replacing Ivan Dixon's departed Kinch. He was 33, stepping into a well-established ensemble in its final year, and he handled it with ease. He was the last surviving series regular when he died on July 18, 2025. Before the show, he appeared in the original Star Trek and found recurring success as Officer Miller on 12. But the turn that defined his later life had absolutely nothing to do with acting. He went back to school, graduated from Loyola Marymount, and built an academic career at designing black actors and a film history. Later, he taught oral interpretation and speech at Southwest College, a commitment to educate till his final years. In 2001, he married Alice Ains Marshall, a prominent media professional who was editor in newspapers, papers, and variety film editor. They stayed together until his death. He was survived by 3 children, Kim Lee, Kenneth Jr., and Quanah Stokes Washington, plus 3 Groshington, and 4 great-grandchildren. His passing in 2025 marked the quiet end of a chapter that started in a Hollywood stowed 60 years earlier. The French resistance operative who slipped in and out of Stalag 13 whenever she wanted in, round a very different kind of edgy. Arlene Martel grew up in a tough Bronx neighborhood and played Tiger on Hogan's Hero as a fearless resistance operative. She was one of those recurring guests who felt like a regular because of what she brought to the screen. Born Arlene Greta Sachs, her road to Hollywood went through a Connecticut boarding school paid for by her mother's boss, leading to career across 3 distinct television universes. Her most famous role came outside Hogan's Heroes, playing Pring, Spock's Vulcan Fiance, in the Stars Tune So Make Time. She also popped up in The Twilight Zone and The Outer Limits. Casting directors called her the Chameleon because she mastered so many accents. She also battled breast cancer and won. Early on, she was linked to James Dean, a connection that was heavily documented in print. She married and divorced 3 times, including a marriage to actor Jerry Douglas, and raised 3 children, Yevra and John. She became close friends with Bob Crane on set, and later served as a key source for biographers trying to reconstruct Reagan's life after his murder. She passed away from a sudden heart attack on August 12, 2014, at 17. One of the show's most reliable guards lived an off-screen life that went in completely unexpected directions. John Cedar spent his childhood touring the country with his family's musical troupe, performing in tiny towns he probably forgot by morning. That nomadic life eventually led to military service in Korea, then to off-Broadway roles in South Pacific and Irma Luce, before landing as Corporal Langenscheidt, his bumbling second-in-command in Hogan's Heroes. He appeared in 17 episodes from 1965 to 1971, playing his part so well that producers handed Ronator's random background Germans without explanation. He was 34 when the show started. Off-camera, he moved into producing in 1978, backing the horror flick The Manatees starring Curtis. He and his wife Barbara also ran a typing service called Barbara's Place, a busy staple of the Hollywood scene through the 1970s and 80s that kept Edis with meeting to act. He remained married to Barbara until she passed away. Later, his longtime companion was Eleanor Lee. He left behind 2 children, Lauren Thompson and Mite. In his final weeks, he received a sudden leukemia diagnosis. It was incredibly aggressive, and he died April 14, 2011, at 11th. Meanwhile, the woman who replaced Helga at Klink's desk lived a life far more dramatic. than any script there more. Her Klink's famous blonde secretary Helda was played by a woman actually named Patricia Annette Olsen. Publicists dreamed up the stage name Secret Valdis to fit her Scandinavian look, and she joined in season 2 after Producer Noser guessed her guest spot in season 1. She was 30, fresh off the runway in New York and Europe, and coming off a supporting role in Arnabis Mum. On October 16, 1970, she married Bob Crane right on the active soundstage, the first legal wedding ever performed on a working Hollywood set. She had a daughter named Anna from an earlier marriage to fashion businessman George Aya. Her son, Robert Scott Crane, was born in 1971, and she retired from acting shortly at his birth. Their marriage fractured in 1977, reconciled in early 78. Then Crane the June, she fled Los Angeles to shield her kids from the media. She spent decades defending his artistic legacy against trashy tabloids, before dying of lung cancer in Northern California, October 14, 2007. The actor who played Hogan's most aristocratic adversary got to Stalag 13 by way of Yale and the Orson Camp Yale. John Hoy graduated from Yale, taught history at the Groton School, then quit to do stand-up impressions at the Rainbow Room in New York. That path explains a lot about the kind of guy who played 4 different German generals across. Always Hogan's heroes, always under a different name, but always with that same immovable authority. He joined Orson Welles' Mercury Theater and headed out to Hollywood, where his intensely stern, aristocratic face landed him roles in Spartacus, Cleopatra, and The Cage, and Ships. Dr. Philip Boyce. The show's producers cast him over and over under totally different names. Field Marshal von Galter, General Brunner. Colonel Braun, General von Baylor. The character changed every time, but the man himself never did. He married Virginia Burns. The married divorced. His second marriage, to Dorothy Marion Ullman in 1961, lasted until he died. They had a Stepson curved. Everything about his on-screen persona suggested he was born in some grand manor house, but he actually started as a stand-up impressionist, doing Noel Coward on vaudeville, which he apparently found hilarious. He died of lung cancer in Santa Cruz on September 15, 1991, at 86. The Vereniging Hussanerin Thanes, past as the Stalag 13 gates, had a much quieter story to tell.